The Resident Evil franchise is one of the most memorable and fun franchises ever. It has its ups and downs, but for the most part, Capcom really hit gold when they mined this thing. In recent years, however, Capcom decided to reimagine the entire Resident Evil series. This culminated in the creation of the Resident Evil 2 remake, which garnered a lot of attention, while also being horror-inducing and thrilling, something the series hasn't really seen since Resident Evil Code Veronica, besides Resident Evil 7. It was extremely successful, topping its original in sales and making roughly $5 million since the launch. With all that success, Capcom decided to take a crack at the old remake strategy again. And what came from this second take is what I believe to be one of the worst Resident Evil games of all time. Resident Evil 3 was the byproduct of two major fuck-ups Capcom made: scheduling and fan pressure. To help you, the viewer, get a better understanding of what I mean, let me quickly explain both terms in the world of game development. Scheduling is the most important part of promoting a game. If you schedule a game to release too early, the devs won't be able to release a proper and finished game that people will like. And I know what you're thinking, but Brendan, why don't they just do what Call of Duty does and just release the other parts of the game later in DLC? Well, first of all, that's a terrible idea, and you should be ashamed of yourself for thinking that. And secondly, fans hate when that happens, even if it's inevitable. They hate the concept of having to wait for a part of a game to release after the initial release date, and they have to pay for it. Just ask them about Super Mario Run. Then there's a late release date, which nets the devs little to no profit because nobody will buy the game, either because another new game is already released or because nobody has the money, like right after Christmas. This also makes the devs look lazy for taking too long on the game and may even permanently tarnish their relationship in the community. And then there's the dreaded burden of game delays. If your game gets delayed, be prepared to get some hate and maybe even racial slurs thrown your way. You do not want your game to get delayed. Now that you somewhat understand scheduling, let's now talk about fan pressure. The most basic of definitions for fan pressure is pretty much the pressure felt by fans to not mess up on a game being developed. Whether it's because the game being developed is a remake of a beloved game from the past, or there's just a lot of hype around it. Either way, fan pressure can make or break a game, and actually connects to the schedule of a release in a sense that fans may also want the game to come out as soon as possible or without any delays, causing even more pressure. While both explanations were pretty basic, you'll come to understand how they both affected the Resident Evil 3 remake soon enough, I promise. Anyway, let's talk about Resident Evil 3. So here's some background info in case you haven't played the remake. You play as Jill Valentine, an officer working for a special division in the Raccoon City Police Department, or RPD, known as STARS, or the Special Tactics and Rescue Service. Jill is actually kind of a veteran at this point. She was a member of the famous Alpha team sent out to investigate where the Bravo team went in cohorts with their investigation of some suspicious cannibal-like murders on the outskirts of Raccoon City. They end up in the Arklay mansion, yada yada yada. Jill ends up investigating the RPD for suspicious actions that were made by the department while also being put on administrative leave, and that's where Resident Evil 3 begins. Jill and her other Alpha Team partner, no, not that partner, that partner, are pretty chill until the city becomes a zombie-infested bukkake and the two characters find out, one of them the hard way, that they're being hunted by a huge hunk of tyrant called Nemesis. As Jill, you team up with an unlikely ally and usually super hot and super bulky Umbrella Biohazard countermeasure soldier Carlos Oliveira to beat the shit out of zombies, lickers, hunters, I hate those goddamn hunters, Nemesis, and the main villain, some weird guy named Nikolai. You survive, but Raccoon City gets blown to smithereens, kind of like these two cities, and you vow to stop whoever started this whole mess. The remake of this game is pretty straightforward. And by straightforward, I mean this is the most linear Resident Evil game I have ever played. It's almost a negative how straightforward the gameplay is. It feels like the developers didn't even try to do what they did perfectly in Resident Evil 2. There weren't a lot of puzzles, or any, now that I think about it. There was a lot of content cut out, like the clock tower and literally half of the RPD station. Downtown is the most annoying part of the game, and it is literally the first place you play in. There's only one story and no DLC whatsoever, meaning that once you've S-ranked the whole game, there's nothing else to do. Also, small tidbit problem, there's no S+, so... Oh, also another plus, the final Nemesis battle, it makes me want to throw my head in the drywall. This game wasn't great. Hell, the fan base at launch knew it, and the fans still haven't forgotten now that it's been 4 months since the release. And it's not like the original was the same. Resident Evil 3 Nemesis, which came out in 1999, was a huge hit, selling tons of units around the world. By 2008, the now 9-year-old game at this point had sold 3.5 million copies on the PlayStation only. It was no surprise to the fans that the game was going to be remade, but they sure as hell weren't expecting what they got. Clearly something was wrong here. But what? Well, let's start with the fan pressure. Many of you are going to assume when I'm going to say that the game was rushed because fans wanted it so early, but that's not even close. Listen to me. Stop thinking. Relax. Soothe yourself. Rent isn't due for another week, my man. Explaining why the game never got any DLC is pretty simple. My theory goes a little bit like this. If we look at the time between the release of Resident Evil 7 in 2017 and Resident Evil 2 in 2019, account for the fact that Resident Evil 2 was in development for 4 years, and on top of that, consider that fans loved the Resident Evil 2 remake at release, and you've got yourself two problems. Fans wanting the same outcome with every next remake and trying to keep everyone interested by releasing those remakes as soon as possible. Realistically, the Resident Evil 3 remake took 3 years to develop, so they had the time to make something good, but I guess 3 years wasn't enough. Capcom actually officially announced they weren't going to make any DLCs for the game, and it makes sense as to why. Capcom also conveniently announced their new Resident Evil game coming out this winter with the PlayStation 5, Resident Evil 8 Village, or Resident Evil Village. I don't really know. Although the game has been hyped up by the community, not all of the fans are blind to the reality of the situation. If you haven't been able to follow along, which I understand, here's what I mean. Isn't it kind of suspicious that Capcom released Resident Evil 3 and just 2 months later they announced the 8th installment of the franchise? From this we can establish two theories. The first being that the RE3 remake was released early to keep fans satisfied while they continued to work on the Resident Evil 8 installment, which would explain the loss of DLC and content being cut from the game. The second theory is that Capcom may have wanted to release the Resident Evil 4 remake in the same scheduled spot as they did Resident Evil 8, but due to fan pressure that would have skyrocketed had they went with the first option, they opted for a new game instead, which would have netted them less fan pressure, and are rushing the 8th installment right now as we speak, which would also explain the loss of DLC for the RE3 remake. Basically, it's either they released RE3 early for fan satisfaction or announced RE8 so they could postpone the Resident Evil 4 remake to 2022, which was reported by VGC back in April, and let's be honest, it's kind of just confirmed at this point. They're gonna come out with a Resident Evil 4 remake. Either way, it explains a good portion of what we just talked about. For now though, all we really know is that the Resident Evil 3 remake will no longer receive DLC conveniently at the same time as the announcement of Resident Evil Village. Sayonara, nigga! Is this game bad? No. Well, yes, it is, but that's not really the game's fault. Capcom did what Capcom typically does best. They get something so amazing with so much potential, and then they bury it so far in the ground that coal miners are unsafely mining it with the intent to burn it for fuel. Resident Evil 3 Nemesis was an iconic game, receiving overwhelming positivity at launch and becoming the standard for Resident Evil and horror games in general. The remake could have been so much better with its amazing graphics and well-written story, but the loss of content and no real future plans for the game gave us a sour taste in our mouths when playing it over and over again. What could have been one of the greatest turned out to be the worst Resident Evil game of all time. Or one of the worst, depending on how you look at it. Oh wow, you made it to the end of this video? Thanks! It means a lot, especially when your fan base bullies you endlessly. If you enjoyed the video, comment what you thought of it, leave a like, or if you didn't like it, leave a dislike, and subscribe for more Resident Evil content, and make sure you click that bell also to stay updated on whenever I upload, which is not very often. I haven't made a video like this in forever, and it was hella fun making the script, so go ahead, send whatever appreciation you have. Shout out to my man Elijah. He's the guy who gave me the idea for this video after watching all of my Resident Evil 3 walkthroughs. He's awesome. He's really cool. He's been around for a long time, so shout out to him. He's really cool. If you want to talk to me about anything Resident Evil based, all of my social media are in the description. And also you can follow me on Facebook and join the communities of Resident Evil that I'm in to have conversations with everybody in those groups. Anyways, guys, I don't know when's the next time I'm going to upload. I just wanted to get this video out because it's a really fun video to make. Anyway, enjoy the rest of your day, and I'll probably see you guys next week on stream. Bye-bye.